My name is Emerson Fletcher. I'm 36 years old, and until last Thursday, I believed that family, real family, showed up when it mattered. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, buzzing just enough to make my skin crawl. I paced the length of the room for what had to be the 100th time, my phone clutched so tightly in my hand that my fingers ached. 9:42 a.m. Harper's surgery was scheduled for 10. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. Across the room, Garrett sat in one of the stiff plastic chairs, scrolling aimlessly, pretending not to watch me unravel. He'd been my best friend since college, the kind of friend who showed up without being asked, who didn't need explanations. "Any word?" he asked gently. I shook my head. Nothing. Dad said he'd be here an hour ago. Natalie said she'd try her best. Garrett frowned. "They know this is surgery, right?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. Apparently, their best doesn't mean much. My daughter, my 13-year-old baby, was about to go under anesthesia for the first time in her life. It wasn't life-threatening, the doctors had reassured me, but that didn't make it less terrifying. It didn't make it less real. They had all promised. My father, my sister, my uncle. Every single one of them had looked me in the eye or texted me back with the same words. "Of course we'll be there." I dropped into the chair beside Garrett, my stomach twisting painfully. "They wouldn't just forget, right?" I whispered. Garrett didn't answer right away. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "I'm here. Whatever happens, you're not alone." Before I could respond, a woman in scrubs appeared at the entrance to the hallway. "Ms. Fletcher?" I jumped to my feet. "Yes. I'm Dr. Morrison," she said warmly. "We're ready to take Harper back now." My heart slammed against my ribs. I rushed down the hallway to Harper's bed, where a nurse was checking her vitals. Harper's face looked too small against the pillow, her brown eyes wide and shiny with fear. "Mom?" Her voice trembled. "Where's Grandpa?" My throat closed instantly. "He said he'd bring me that stuffed bear from the zoo," she continued, her fingers gripping the blanket. "And Aunt Natalie said she'd show me pictures from her cruise after." I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face in half. "They're running a little late, sweetheart." Her eyes searched mine. "You're not leaving, right?" "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," I said, kissing her forehead. As the nurses began wheeling her toward the operating room, Harper's gaze stayed locked on mine, right until the doors swung shut. The moment they did, my knees nearly buckled. For the next 3 hours, time moved like syrup. I checked my phone obsessively. Voicemail. Silence. Nothing. Garrett muttered under his breath. "This is unbelievable." "I don't understand," I said quietly. "I told them the date weeks ago." When Dr. Morrison finally returned, I was on my feet before she said a word. "Everything went perfectly," she said with a reassuring smile. "Harper's in recovery. You'll be able to see her shortly." Relief crashed through me so hard I had to sit down. That night, I sat beside Harper's bed, watching her sleep under the dim hospital lights. My phone stayed silent. When she woke up later, groggy and tear-stained, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Where were they, Mom?" I had no answer. 3 days later, Harper lay on our couch at home, propped up with pillows. Garrett had stopped by with groceries and a pot of homemade soup. That's when my phone finally buzzed. A text from my father. "Sorry we missed Harper's thing. Got caught up. Everything okay?" My vision blurred. "Harper's thing?" I whispered. Garrett looked up. "What is it?" I handed him my phone with shaking hands. He stared at the screen, then hesitated. "Emerson, there's something you need to see." He opened Instagram. There it was. A photo tagged from Thursday morning, the day of the surgery. My father's cabin in Lake Tahoe. A bonfire, smiling faces, matching Fletcher family reunion t-shirts. My father, my sister Natalie, my uncle Raymond, cousins I hadn't seen in months. The caption read, "Wouldn't miss it for the world. #family first." My chest felt hollow. "They skipped Harper's surgery," I whispered, "for a reunion. I wasn't even invited to." And in that moment, sitting in my own living room, I realized something had been breaking long before the hospital ever entered the picture. The photo burned into my vision long after Garrett lowered his phone. I stared at the frozen smiles, at my father's arm slung casually around Natalie's shoulders, at the bonfire glowing behind them like some cruel symbol of warmth I hadn't been allowed to touch. They all knew, I said faintly. Garrett didn't try to soften it. The timestamps don't lie. My phone buzzed again in my hand, as if mocking me. Another text from my father, cheerful, casual, like nothing monumental had happened. I didn't reply. Instead, I pressed Natalie's name and hit call. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, Em, I was just about to check in. How's Harper doing?" That tone, light, friendly, oblivious. "Don't," I said quietly. There was a pause. "Don't what?" "Don't pretend this is a normal conversation." Another pause. Heavier this time. "I just saw the photos," I continued, my voice dangerously calm. "The reunion, Tahoe, Thursday." Silence stretched between us. Finally, she exhaled. "Okay, so you saw that." "You were all there," I said, "while my daughter was in surgery." Natalie rushed in, words tumbling over each other. "Emerson, it wasn't like that. Dad called on Monday night, everything came together really fast, and none of you thought to tell me?" I cut in. "Not one of you thought, hey, Emerson's kid is having surgery. Maybe we should show up, or at least be honest." "Well, Dad thought it might stress you out more if we told you," she said quickly. "You've been through so much already." I laughed. I actually laughed. Stress me out? My hand shook so badly, Garrett gently took the phone from me, putting it on speaker so I wouldn't drop it. "You know what stressed me out, Natalie? Sitting in that waiting room, wondering why my family disappeared while my daughter was under anesthesia." "She wasn't alone," Natalie said defensively. "Garrett was there." Garrett froze. "Wow. That's your argument?" I snapped. "That because my best friend showed up, my family didn't have to?" "That's not what I meant," she said, but her voice wavered now. "You know things have been complicated since Brandon left. You've been distant." "Since I became a single mom," I corrected. "Since I needed help instead of just being convenient." Natalie sighed. "You're twisting this." "No," I said. "I'm finally seeing it clearly." I hung up before she could respond. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for years and only just realized it. Garrett sat beside me. "Do you want me to call your dad?" I shook my head. "I'll do it." Dad answered on the second ring. His voice was bright, almost relieved. "Emerson, I was wondering when you'd call. How's my little trooper?" "Don't," I said again. "Don't use that voice." His tone shifted instantly. "What's going on?" "I know about Tahoe." A beat. "Emerson." "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to explain yet. You promised Harper you'd be there. You promised her a stuffed bear. She cried for you." "We didn't abandon anyone," he said sharply. "Things came up." "A family reunion planned weeks in advance?" I shot back. "Because Raymond says this was organized 3 weeks ago, right after I texted everyone Harper's surgery date." Silence. Garrett's eyebrows lifted slowly. "That's not accurate," Dad said finally. "Raymond exaggerates." "So you're calling him a liar?" I asked. "I'm saying you're being overly sensitive." There it was. The phrase he always used when he didn't want to take responsibility. "Sensitive?" My voice cracked. "My daughter thought her grandfather didn't care enough to show up." "Well, after everything you've been through," he said, "Natalie and I thought it might be better to give you space." "By lying to me?" I asked. "By excluding me?" "You're always busy with work," he replied coolly. "We didn't think you'd want to come anyway." I closed my eyes. "You decided that for me," I said. "You decided for Harper." "We can make it up to her," he said quickly. "Take her shopping, Disneyland, something special." "That's not how this works," I said. "You don't buy your way out of emotional abandonment." I heard Harper shift on the couch behind me, wincing as she adjusted her pillows. "I have to go," I said tightly. "My daughter needs her medication." I hung up before he could respond. For a long moment, neither Garrett nor I spoke. Then he said quietly, "I texted Raymond earlier." My stomach dropped. "What did he say?" Garrett hesitated. "The reunion was planned 3 weeks ago. Your dad reserved the cabins, ordered the t-shirts, everything." I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. 3 weeks, I whispered. That's when we scheduled the surgery. There's more, Garrett added, his voice heavy. Raymond said they didn't invite you because they assumed you wouldn't come. Because I'm too busy, I finished bitterly. Too busy raising my child alone. Garrett nodded grimly. And Emerson, remember that loan your dad gave you last year for Harper's medical expenses? My heart began to pound. I'm paying it back every month. Raymond said your dad used that money, Garrett continued, to help pay for the luxury cabins in Tahoe. The room tilted. He what? He was bragging about making it work with the funds he had available. I stood up so abruptly the coffee table rattled. He used money meant for his granddaughter's medical care, I said slowly, for a party I wasn't invited to. Garrett's face was tight with anger. I'm so sorry. I felt strangely calm, too calm. I need to see him, I said, face to face. Emerson, maybe give it a day. No, I said. If I wait, I'll talk myself out of it, and I'm done doing that. As I looked toward the hallway where Harper slept, something inside me hardened. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern, and for the first time, I wasn't going to excuse it. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Harper's face as the nurses wheeled her away. The way she'd asked about her grandfather, the way I'd lied to her with a smile. By morning, the shock had burned off, leaving something colder behind. Resolve. I helped Harper take her medication, waited until she drifted back to sleep, then sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, writing dates and numbers like I was building a case, because that's exactly what it was becoming. 3 weeks ago, surgery scheduled. 3 weeks ago, group text sent. 3 weeks ago, family reunion planned. There was no coincidence here. Garrett came over around 10 with coffee and that same careful look he'd had since the Instagram photos. You still want to go? He asked. I need to, I said. Not to yell, not to cry. I need to hear him say it. Say what? The truth, I replied, out loud, to my face. We drove to my father's house in Sacramento 2 days later. The Spanish-style home looked exactly the same. Arched doorway, terracotta roof, the rose bush my mother used to tend still blooming by the porch. Seeing it made my chest ache in a way I hadn't expected. You okay? Garrett asked quietly. I will be, I said, even though my hands were trembling as I rang the doorbell. Dad opened the door, wearing a Lake Tahoe t-shirt. Of course he was. Emerson? His eyebrows lifted in surprise. Garrett, what brings you? We need to talk, I said, stepping past him without waiting for permission. Natalie and Uncle Raymond were already inside, sitting on the leather couch with wine glasses in their hands. They froze when they saw me. Oh, Natalie said weakly. We were just talking about coming to see Harper. Don't, I said, holding up my hand. Please don't. Dad closed the door slowly behind us. You're overreacting. That word again. I pulled out my phone and set it on the coffee table. Raymond told Garrett the reunion was planned 3 weeks in advance. Raymond shifted uncomfortably. I didn't think... And 3 weeks ago, I continued, my voice steady now, I told all of you my daughter's surgery date. I have the text thread. The dates line up perfectly. Dad's jaw tightened. It wasn't personal. I laughed once, sharply. You excluded me from a family event and abandoned my child when she needed you. How is that not personal? We thought you wouldn't come, Natalie said quietly. You're always busy. You've been different since Brandon left. Since I needed help, I corrected. Since I stopped being easy. Dad stepped forward. You've always handled things on your own. We assumed you had it under control. Because I had to, I said, my voice finally cracking. Because when Brandon walked out when Harper was 3, none of you stepped up. But this wasn't about me. This was about her. Silence filled the room. Then I asked the question that had been clawing at me for days. The loan, I said, turning to my father. The money you gave me for Harper's medical bills. His eyes flickered. What about it? Raymond says you used it to help pay for the Tahoe cabins. Raymond looked down. Dad's face hardened. I lent you that money. You told me it was from your emergency fund, I said. You made me feel guilty for even asking. What I do with my finances is my business, he snapped. You took money meant for your granddaughter's medical care, I said, stepping closer. and spent it on a vacation. I didn't steal anything, he said sharply. My hands were shaking now. I've never missed a payment, not once. I worked 2 jobs, I cut corners, and all this time you were punishing me for needing help. You're being dramatic, he scoffed. That's when something inside me finally broke. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope. I took out a loan this morning, I said, placing it on the table. Every cent I owe you, plus interest. Natalie gasped. Emerson, don't be stupid. I'd rather owe a bank than you, I said quietly. Dad lunged forward. Give me that. Don't touch me, I snapped, stepping back. My hip. Dad exploded. That was your mother's. Don't you dare use her against me, I shouted. She would be ashamed of this. His face twisted with rage. Get out. Get out of my house, or I swear. Or what? I challenged. What will you do? His voice. The room went dead silent. Garrett stepped forward, phone raised. Did you just threaten a child, Mr. Fletcher? Because I recorded that. Dad's eyes widened. I placed the envelope back on the table. This isn't over, I said. Not even close. And the drive home was silent. Not the comfortable kind. The kind where every mile feels heavier than the last, where your body is still buzzing from adrenaline, but your chest feels hollow. Harper was asleep when we got back. I stood in her doorway for a long time, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest, the stuffed pillow tucked carefully under her healing side. She looked peaceful, and I realized how close I'd come to letting someone who didn't deserve access to her keep having it. Garrett, good, I said. My voice sounded distant even to me. I don't want there to be any chance it disappears. I'm going to protect my daughter, I replied. Finally. The next morning, I made phone calls I never imagined I'd have to make. Adult Protective Services, a legal aid office, a family law attorney recommended by a colleague who didn't ask questions, just listened. By the afternoon, my hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was grief. Not for the man who'd threatened my child, but for the father I thought I had. The attorney was calm, professional. The recording is serious, she said. Threats involving a minor, admission of financial misuse, coercive behavior. We can file for a restraining order. Do it, I said without hesitation. 2 days later, my phone exploded. Natalie called first. What did you do? She demanded, panic bleeding into her voice. I protected my child, I said evenly. You reported Dad? She whispered. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes, I replied. I finally stopped pretending. Raymond texted next. Then cousins. Then an aunt I hadn't spoken to in years. So I sent the recording. Not selectively. Not carefully. To everyone. Within hours, the family narrative unraveled. Cousins called in shock. They hadn't known about Harper's surgery. They'd been told I declined the reunion because I was too busy and didn't want to be involved anymore. One by one, the lies surfaced. By evening, my father went silent. No calls, no texts. Just a knock on the door the next afternoon. A process server. Restraining order granted. Temporary, pending hearing. Harper watched from the hallway as I signed the paperwork. Is Grandpa in trouble? She asked quietly. I knelt beside her. Grandpa made some bad choices, and now we're making sure he can't hurt us. She nodded, more mature than any 13-year-old should have to be. That night, Garrett brought burgers and milkshakes. He handed Harper a stuffed bear, the same one my father had promised. I thought he deserved better, Garrett said softly. Harper hugged it tightly, tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you. I turned away so she wouldn't see mine. A week later, I sat in Dr. Morrison's office for Harper's follow-up appointment. The incision was healing beautifully. She's doing great, the doctor said warmly. Both of you are. She hesitated, then asked, How are you holding up? I exhaled slowly. I thought this would destroy me. And, she prompted gently, and somehow I feel lighter, she smiled knowingly. Sometimes removing the source of the wound is the hardest part of healing. As we left the clinic, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I deleted it. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. Being his daughter had cost me too much. 3 weeks later, the moving truck idled at the curb outside our Sacramento apartment, its engine humming softly, like it was waiting for permission to carry us into something new. Harper stood beside me on the sidewalk, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her stuffed bear tucked firmly under her arm. The surgical incision was healing well now, just a thin line beneath the bandage. But the emotional scar left by everything else still lingered in quieter ways. "You ready?" I asked her. She squeezed my hand. "Yeah, I think so." Behind us, Garrett loaded the last box into his car. He'd insisted on driving up the coast with us, saying it was for safety, though we both knew it was really about not letting us go alone. The restraining order hearing had happened a week earlier. My father didn't look at me once in the courtroom. The recording spoke for itself. The judge's voice was firm, unwavering. The order was extended, contact prohibited, distance enforced. When the gavel came down, something inside me settled. Not triumph, not revenge, closure. Afterward, the fallout had been immediate and chaotic. Cousins called to apologize, voices thick with shame. Aunts admitted they'd believed my father when he said I'd chosen work over family. Messages poured in, some asking for explanations, others begging to meet before we left. I listened. I didn't argue. I didn't chase understanding anymore. One detail, however, changed everything. The Tahoe cabin. It turned out the property had been partially in my mother's name. When she died 5 years ago, no one mentioned it. But legally, I'd inherited a 25% share. The lawyer had raised an eyebrow when she found the paperwork. "You can force a sale." So I did. Not out of spite, out of principle. Consequences, not revenge. When the papers were filed, my father finally broke his silence. "You're tearing this family apart," he texted from a new number. I didn't reply, because the truth was simpler than that. I hadn't torn anything apart. I'd just stopped holding it together by myself. The morning of our departure, Harper climbed into the passenger seat of my Honda CR-V and buckled herself in carefully. "Mom?" she asked as Garrett pulled in behind us. "Yeah? Is Grandpa ever going to talk to us again?" I considered the question honestly. "I don't know," I said, "but here's what I do know. We're going to be okay either way." She nodded slowly. "Because we have real family." I smiled. Exactly. We pulled out onto the road just as the sun crept higher in the sky. Sacramento faded behind us. As the miles passed, my phone buzzed one last time. A group message from several cousins, all apologizing, all saying they hadn't known, all asking for another chance. I looked at the screen. Then I locked my phone and set it face down. Garrett rolled down his window, shouting from his car, "Portland better be ready for you two." Harper laughed, loud and unrestrained. "And the ocean!" "Yes," I said, smiling. "The ocean." As the highway stretched ahead of us, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I used to believe forgiveness was mandatory, that healing required me to understand, excuse, and reconcile. I don't believe that anymore. Sometimes healing means walking away. Sometimes protecting your child is all the closure you need. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. And as the road curved north, carrying us toward a life built on choice instead of obligation, I knew with absolute certainty that we had chosen right.